Okay, back to the project here. I did get this the optical drive all glued down and in place, and I got a couple screws holding it in there. That's all glued down, and that's pretty much, it's not done, but it's in there. And I decided I'd start doing some of the wiring today. Start out with the USB 2 ports that go on the side. I was just going to plug this in here, and I was hoping I'd just plug right in and everything would fit okay, but I ran into one little snag. It's not a serious problem. I already figured out how to fix it. Let's see here. This plug here, it's just a little bit too long and it hits the motherboard. So what I decided to do to fix that problem is I'm going to desolder this plug and solder this right in its place so it's straight up and down, and that'll keep it from hitting the motherboard. So I got that part figured out. And then as long as I got the soldering key out, I figured I might as well wire up the chips for the controllers. Now what you want to do is them chips that I was talking about earlier, these here, they come with a USB cable soldered to them, but I'm not going to use the cable. All I want is the chip itself. And I get these from retrousb.com. That's the only website that I found these. You can't get them off of Amazon or anything like that if you want just the chip. And the same website also provides the wiring diagram. This chip works also for SNES, Super Nintendo controllers, but you just want the Nintendo controller wiring diagram. So you want that. And then you also want the wiring diagram for your NES. That tells you which wire code, which is ground, which is 5 volt, and all that. And you have to match that all up. This is where you want to get a little notebook, pen and paper, write everything down, keep track of where each wire goes. It sounds a little overwhelming, but if you take your time, do it one wire at a time, double check everything, it turns out okay. But yeah, make yourself a nice printout of all the wiring codes. USB, it's only 4 wires. You can't get much simpler than that. It's just your 5 volt, your ground, and then your 2 data cables. So I'm going to go get my soldering station and my desolder iron. I'm going to start wiring things up. Okay. In my opinion, soldering is a little bit like welding. It does take some practice, and it's not the easiest thing to do, but I would say if you've never soldered before, I would strongly recommend getting some old electronics board or something that's no good and practice a little bit before you actually solder. Another thing is, like anything else, equipment, you can get by with a cheap soldering iron. I mean, they'll work in a pinch. I mean, they're not bad. I still use like this little 25 watt Weller. I mean, it'll get the job done. But if you're gonna do a lot of soldering, I highly recommend getting a regular soldering station with a real fine tip, because it's just so much better, especially if you get a digital one. You can control the heat a little better, be a little more precise. Another thing is for desoldering, yeah, these little cheap desolder suckers, they work, but if you're going to do a lot of soldering, you might want to get something a little better, like this one from Radio Shack. I do like this one. This one works quite well for removing solder from stuff. This is the one I like to use. You can even get a more expensive one with a vacuum pump, but I don't do that much soldering, so I didn't need nothing that extravagant. But I don't consider myself a professional solderer, no way. I mean, some of the stuff I solder doesn't look that great, but the stuff I do solder seems to still work. So I find the biggest trick is the cleaner you can keep things, the better. You know, you want the thing you're going to solder as clean as possible, and use flux, you know, and your tip. You want to keep your tip as clean as possible, and you want to keep it what they call, you want to keep your tip tinned. They call it tinning your tip. Basically, you want melted solder on the end. You want it almost looking like a mirror at the end of your tip when it's all hot. It should be real nice and shiny, and so the solder flows real nice and evenly. And so I guess that's my soldering tips. That's all I can think of at the moment. So I'm going to do some soldering. Well, it's not perfect. It doesn't look like it's from the factory, but I do believe I got the job done. So yeah, you just got to make sure the solder doesn't, you know, it's not shorting out anywhere. So that takes care of that. And another thing I noticed that may confuse some people, each USB consists of 4 wires, but these cables, there's a pair. See, there's 4 wires for each plug. And the most common wiring code for these is red, white, green, black. Well, as you can see here, just get things. On this cable, there is a red, white, green, black on one side, but then on the other side, it's different colors. Let's see, what's the best way to explain it? I guess you just want to keep them paired up. Where the red one is, right across from it is an orange wire. So the orange one is really red. It's just the other side of it. So I just wrote on my diagram, like orange is also red. Then right across from the white wire, there's a gray wire. Then right across from the green wire is a yellow wire. Then right across from the black is a blue wire. So that's all you got to remember is, you know, just write everything down, keep track of everything. Most USB extension cables, they keep the, I don't know why they use different color wires. I suppose because they had to use different color wires, I don't know. But the last ones I bought was red, you know, red, white. Why they did that, I don't know, but that's the way these were anyway. But that's all you got to remember is four pins for each USB, and as long as you keep them where they need to be, you should be all right. And this is what it should look like when you get it all done. Each controller has its own chip. There's 2 wires you don't need, and that is the purple and the blue. So if you want to, these just slide onto some pins on the back side. You can pull the purple and the blue wire off. The only ones you need are these 5 wires, brown and white, and red, orange, and yellow. And if, like say, if you follow this diagram, it tells you where to solder them 5 wires onto the chip. So all you gotta do is make sure you follow that diagram, and solder them wires to that side of the chip. And then this is the USB, and then this end will get plugged into USB 2.0 on the motherboard. There's 2 of them on here. I ain't decided which one to plug it in on yet, but I'm gonna find a way to either hot glue or mount these down somewhere down in here so they don't short out on anything or anything like that, but that's how it should look when it's all done. So, and that'll allow you to plug in your regular standard NES controller and use it. So that's how that goes. And then for the side USB ports, the ones that slide in on the side, I took a couple more of them little plastic standoffs, filed them down, and I epoxied them down so I can screw that down in place. I don't know if I can do this with one hand or not, but I'll try. It slides in there pretty tight. That slides down in there, and we put a couple screws in there, and that holds that down nice and neat. So when you plug something in, it doesn't break off, so it's good and sturdy. Put a couple screws in that. Okay, I'm going to start working on the power reset and LED buttons. Another issue I do have with the design I have is it would be nice to use the original switches, but where my motherboard is, they're just too darn big. They take up a little bit too much room. So I'm gonna, if you do want to use if you can use it, all you gotta do is remove this little copper plate here, and it'll make the power button a momentary switch, like the reset button, and that's what you need. You can't use an on-off switch on a motherboard. It just won't work. You need what's called a momentary switch, but I can't use any of this. The only thing I'll be using is the metal bracket and this little LED plastic thing here. So I'll have to start ripping this apart to make it fit. What I've done in the past, luckily, I have a whole bunch of old computers lying around. That's what you have to do, salvage some parts from old computers. And you can either use one of these switches, a little smaller. I don't know if I can use that one or not, but that was an option. The ones I really like, I'll have to do some more digging, are these little switches. These are really small. I mean, it's you can see it. I didn't take it out yet, but if I can find another one of these laying around, these will work great. So that's where I am with that right now. The buttons, you can just pull them right off. They just snap on, the buttons themselves. And then to remove this circuit board, you just have to desolder the buttons and desolder the solder from the two pins. And if you're real careful, you can wiggle that right off. And all you're left with is this. And then in order to get these off, there's just two tabs you bend open. And then you can slide these buttons right off. So all that we have left is this plastic LED thing and the bracket.